4 people whose families left no marks. No bruises, no incident, nothing you could photograph or point to, which is exactly why, for years, nobody believed them, and why they didn't quite believe themselves. If that's you, hear this before we start. The fact that you can't prove it doesn't mean it didn't happen. These are their stories.
People always tell me how lucky I am because my mother and I were so close. We were best friends. Everyone said so. She told everyone that. And it took me until I was almost 40 to understand that the thing everyone kept calling closeness was the exact thing that was crushing me. Because we weren't close, I was hers. There's a difference, and almost nobody can see it from the outside. From when I was very small, I was her confidant, her therapist, her emotional support. She would tell me things a child should never have to carry, about her marriage, about money, about how nobody in the world understood her except me. I was 8, 9 years old, managing my mother's feelings, staying up to comfort her. And it felt like love. It felt special, being needed like that, being the only one who could reach her. That's the trap of it. It feels like being chosen. It's only decades later that you realize you were never actually allowed to be a child, because your job, from the start, was to look after her.
What Nadia is describing has a name that surprises people: parentification, and in its deeper form, emotional incest. Not physical. Please hear that clearly. But a parent using a child as their emotional partner, their confidant, the one who meets their needs. The child is quietly robbed of a childhood and handed a job instead. And because it's dressed up as being so close, as being best friends, it is almost impossible for the grown child to ever see it as harm. It felt like intimacy. It was actually a role.
I'll give you one memory, because it's the one that finally undid me in therapy. I was maybe 10. It was late, and I'd school in the morning, and she came and sat on the end of my bed and cried and told me my father didn't love her and asked me, a 10-year-old, in pajamas, what she should do. And I remember lying there thinking, very seriously, working the problem because it was mine to solve now. And when I finally said something comforting, she brightened and hugged me and told me I was the only one who understood her, the only one she could really talk to. And I glowed. That's what I need people to understand. I wasn't frightened. I was proud. I had been given the most important job in the house, and I did it well for 30 years, and it nearly cost me my whole life. The trouble only started the moment I tried to have a life of my own. A boyfriend meant she'd suddenly be ill, or in tears, or not speaking to me for days. How could I abandon her for some man? When I moved cities for a job, she rang 11 times on the first day. 11. And when I didn't pick up, the voicemails went from worried to wounded to furious and back to worried, all inside an hour. Every single step I took toward my own life, she experienced as a betrayal. Because, in her mind, I wasn't a separate person who could leave. I was a part of her that was tearing away.
This is enmeshment, where the boundary between parent and child was simply never allowed to form, so the child's independence feels, to the parent, like an amputation. Your growth is experienced as their loss. And that's why the guilt in these cases is so ferocious. You're not being told you did something wrong. You're being told that your very separateness, your having a self at all, is the wound. No wonder people in Nadia's position feel like monsters simply for wanting a life.
I didn't leave in a blaze. I went quiet, slowly, over years. Low contact first. Shorter calls, fewer of them, keeping my own life to myself because sharing any of it just gave her more to manage and more to grieve. And every inch of distance I took, she filled with a fresh crisis. In the end, I understood something that finally set me down. There was no amount of me that was ever going to be enough, because the hole was never mine to fill. It was never going to be full. And I was allowed to stop pouring myself into it. That one sentence saved my life. I was allowed to stop.
My mother was always dying. That's the shortest, truest way I can explain 30 years of it. Not actually. She's perfectly healthy. She'll outlive all of us. But there was always a crisis, always an illness, always some looming catastrophe that meant I couldn't do the thing I was about to do for myself. And if I ever went ahead and did it anyway, I would be punished with the single worst weapon she had. Fine, go. Don't worry about me. I probably won't be here much longer anyway. She never got angry the way other people's parents did. She collapsed. Any boundary, any disagreement, any small moment where I dared to put myself first, and she would fall to pieces, become fragile, become the victim of me. I once tried to spend a single Christmas with friends. By the end of that phone call, she was talking about how there was really no point in her carrying on if her own son didn't need her anymore. I was 22. I canceled, of course. Of course I canceled. What else does a person do when their mother hands them her own survival and says, "Here, this is your responsibility now, mind you don't drop it"?
This is emotional blackmail, and it runs on 3 fuels. Therapists sometimes shorthand it as fog, fear, obligation, and guilt. And the specific tool Tom is describing is weaponized fragility. Anger you can resist, you can push back against someone who's shouting. But collapse? Helplessness? A threat to simply stop existing? Those don't invite resistance, they demand rescue. A child cannot fight a parent who answers every no by falling apart, because that child has been made personally responsible for keeping the parent alive. That is a crushing weight to hand a person, and make no mistake, it is a form of control.
And it teaches you things that follow you out into the whole rest of your life. To this day, if my phone rings twice in a row, my stomach drops before my brain has even caught up. Because in my house, 2 calls in a row meant something had gone wrong and it was somehow going to be my fault. I flinch at other people's sadness. If someone I love is upset, I feel this old automatic panic, like an alarm going off, like I have to fix it right now or something terrible will happen. My wife had to teach me, gently, over years, that another adult being sad is not an emergency I have to solve. I was 35 before I understood that. 35. Learning a thing most people just grow up knowing. That's the part that has no bruise. That's the part nobody sees. It finally broke on the day my daughter was born. My wife was in labor, hours of it, and my phone kept lighting up. My mother, who had decided that this day, of all the days in the year, was the day she was having a health scare. Chest pains. Probably nothing, she said, but then who would ever really know, since nobody cared whether she lived or died? And I stood in that hospital corridor, with my phone buzzing in my hand, and for the first time in my entire life, the guilt just didn't arrive. Because I finally saw the timing of it. It was always the timing. Every crisis had arrived at the precise moment I had something of my own. My whole life, she had never once let me have a single thing that was only mine.
Watch what Tom just noticed. The timing.
When the emergencies reliably arrive at the exact moment you have something good, something independent, something that isn't about them, that timing is the pattern showing its hand. A genuine crisis does not schedule itself around your happiness. And the guilt not coming, that day in the corridor, that isn't coldness, it's clarity. Sometimes it takes standing there holding your own brand new family to finally feel the difference between a parent in need and a parent using need as a leash.
Here's the part I was not ready for. I always assumed that if I ever left, it would be me against my mother. One person against one person. It wasn't. It was me against everyone. The aunts, the uncles, the cousins, my own brother, the entire family closed ranks and not around the truth. Around the quiet. And overnight, I became the problem. Not what had been done to me for 30 years. Me. For finally refusing to be silent about it. I was the one who said it out loud at last at a family dinner, calmly. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I just named one thing. One true thing that had happened. And the reaction around that table was not shock at what had been done to me. It was fury at me for saying it. Why would you bring that up now? You're upsetting your mother. Can't you just let it go for the sake of the family? And I looked slowly around at all these people I loved, and I realized not one of them was asking whether I was okay. Every single one of them was asking me to go back to being quiet, because my silence was the thing that kept all of them comfortable.
What Grace ran into is the family system defending itself, and it has a couple of names worth knowing, because knowing them helps you stop taking it personally. The relatives who get dispatched to pressure you back into line, the ones who phone to tell you you're breaking your mother's heart. In these communities, they're called flying monkeys. They're usually not evil. They've simply been handed a one-sided story, and they're invested in the piece, not the truth. And Grace herself has been assigned a role in that system. The identified patient, the one the whole family quietly agrees is the difficult one. Because naming her as the problem is so much easier than looking at what she's pointing to.
The call I remember most came from an aunt I'd always adored. And she didn't ring to ask what had happened to me or how I was. She rang to tell me, in this soft, disappointed voice, that I was tearing the family apart and that my mother hadn't slept in a week, and that surely, whatever it was, it couldn't be worth all this. Surely I could just be the bigger person. And the thing that broke my heart was that she meant it kindly. She genuinely thought she was helping. She had no idea she'd been sent, that my mother had gotten to her first, with tears, with a version where I was cruel and unstable, and cutting a loving old woman off for nothing. Every relative who called me difficult had been handed that same story before I ever got to speak. I wasn't up against my mother. I was up against a version of me she'd been quietly building in everyone's mind for years, in case she ever needed it. And now she did. The phrase that finally freed me was, "Keep the peace." Because one day I really heard it, and I understood that it had never once been peace. It was only ever quiet. There is a difference, and it's everything. Peace is when things are genuinely, actually okay between people. Quiet is just when nobody is allowed to say that they're not. My whole family had spent my whole life confusing the two on purpose and calling it love. And the day I stopped mistaking their quiet for peace was the day I could no longer go back to keeping it.
Keeping the peace almost always means keeping the quiet, and it is almost always the person who was wounded, never the person who did the wounding, who is asked to keep it. If you are the one in your family being told to let it go, to not make a scene, to think of everyone else, notice that the request only ever seems to point in one direction. That imbalance is the whole tell. You were quietly made the keeper of a silence that protects everyone in the room except the one person who actually had to live it.
Everyone always wants to talk about my father because he was the loud one, the frightening one, the obvious one. But I need to talk about my mother because the truth that took me the longest, by far, to face is that in the end, it wasn't my father who broke my heart. It was her. The one who saw all of it every single time and chose, over and over, across 30 years, to do absolutely nothing. Her entire religion was, don't upset him. That was the one rule the whole house was built around. Don't upset your father. Keep your voice down. He's had a hard day. Just apologize. Even when you did nothing wrong, it's easier for everyone. She wasn't cruel. That's the thing people can't get their heads around. She was gentle. Genuinely gentle. But every ounce of that gentleness was spent managing me into being smaller and quieter so that he wouldn't erupt. Never once on standing between him and me. She had 30 years of chances to say, that's enough. That is my son. She never took a single one.
This is the enabling parent, and Oliver is right that the wound they leave is very often the one that lasts the longest. The overt parent, at least, you can name. Everyone can see what they did. But the parent who witnessed it, who had every power to intervene and instead spent their energy keeping you quiet and compliant, that is a betrayal that hides itself behind gentleness. Don't upset him sounds like keeping the peace. What it actually does is make a child responsible for their abuser's moods, and it quietly tells that child, I see this, and I will not protect you.
There's one moment I can't put down. I was 14, and it had been a bad night, and afterwards I found her in the kitchen, and I looked at her. I didn't even say anything, I just looked at her, this look that said, please do something, you're the grown-up. And she turned back to the sink and started washing a pan that was already clean. That's it. That's the whole memory. A clean pan and her back to me. And I understood, at 14, with total clarity, that no help was coming from that direction, not ever, and that I was on my own in that house. People want a dramatic story. It's a woman washing a clean pan so she doesn't have to turn around. That's the one that still gets me. When I finally pulled away from both of them, she was genuinely bewildered, hurt even. But I never did anything to you, she said. And there it was. That was the whole thing, wasn't it? That was exactly, precisely it. She never did anything. I needed a mother to do one thing just once, and across an entire childhood, she chose the quiet over me, every time. I don't hate her. I honestly ache for her. But I could not keep setting myself on fire to keep her warm, the way she had trained me from birth to do for him.
I never did anything. And notice, in these families, that is sometimes the single most honest sentence the enabling parent ever manages to say. The harm was never an action. It was a lifetime of chosen inaction, of standing at the door and never once opening it. So if you are grieving a parent who never did anything, I want you to understand something clearly. A failure to protect a child is not neutral, and it is not nothing.
Protection was the job. Its absence is the injury. 4 families, and not a single mark between them. And that is the thread, and it's the cruelest part of this particular kind of harm. Because when there's no incident, no bruise, no single moment you can hold up, you are left with only a feeling that something was deeply wrong in a house that everyone else thought was lovely, and a family and a world only too happy to tell you that the feeling is the problem, that you're too sensitive, that you're rewriting history, that you're the difficult one. So let me say the thing plainly, the thing nobody said to any of the 4 people you heard tonight. The absence of proof is not the absence of harm. Enmeshment leaves no bruise. Weaponized fragility leaves no bruise. A silence that goes on for 30 years leaves no bruise. But every one of them shapes a child, and every one of them is real, and you are allowed to trust the feeling that has been with you your whole life, the quiet, patient certainty that something was not okay. You are not too sensitive. You were paying attention. If tonight's stories were yours too, then you already know. Naming it is where getting free begins. Look after yourself. I'll see you in the next one.